I hope Professor Sengupta, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're
I
not
can
audible.
hear
You. No, we can't hear you actually.
Because I'm not muted, so I can hear you very clearly.
I think there is some issue with your voice. We are not being able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I'm able to hear her.
I think somebody said.
This is
Komal
Komal
here. Some problem with your voice. Yes, Komal?
Yeah, so I'm able to hear you.
I can't hear Dr. Sengupta.
Okay.
Is she audible to everyone?
You need to drop a message. I'll just drop a message.
Yeah, I can hear everything, so I have no problem in hearing anyone.
Hello?
Everyone is able to hear.
I think there is some issue with the voice of Dr. Sengupta. We are not being able to clearly hear her.
No, I think others can hear me. You are not able to hear me.
Okay, others can hear you.
Yes.
All right, so we shall begin with the session now without wasting any time now. So I would briefly introduce Dr. Sengupta. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Sengupta, for joining us. It's been great pleasure to have you. Dr. Sengupta's research focuses on policy-relevant issues of emerging economies in general and India in particular. In the fields of international finance, open economy, macroeconomics, monetary policy, and financial markets and regulations, she has recently been exploring several issues pertaining to the Indian economy, such as the evolution of the macroeconomic trilemma, monetary policy transmission channels, issues in the measurement of Indian GDP, the twin balance sheet crisis in the banking and corporate sectors, and the financial constraints faced by Indian firms. She has also been working on corporate insolvency and bankruptcy reforms in India as part of the research secretariat of the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee set up by the Ministry of Finance, Government of India in the year 2014. In the past, she has held research positions at Institute for Financial Management and Research, Chennai, the Reserve Bank of India in Delhi, and at the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. as well. She has published in reputed international journals such as Economic Policy, Journal of International Monetary and Finance, the World Economy, Emerging Markets Review, Pacific Economic Review, and Open Economies Review, as well as the Economic and Political Weekly in India. Dr. Sen Gupta had completed her MBA, her MA and Ph.D. in economics from the University of California, Santa Cruz, UCSC. She holds 2 previous degrees in economics from India, a bachelor's degree from the Presidency College, Calcutta, and a master's from the very famous Delhi School of Economics, New Delhi. I would like to give few instructions to the participants. I would request everyone to shut your videos so that there would be a good network connectivity and the audio would be audible to everyone. Secondly, we would have a break at 39th minute or the 40th minute, and we can join in, everybody can join in again using the same link that we have shared with you. We would like to have your questions, so keep your questions with you till the second half. We would have your questions once we finish the lecture by Dr. Sengupta, and as per her convenience, we will be able to take it up. You can write those questions in the chat box. We would take it accordingly. So I would request Dr. Sengupta to begin her session.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandeep. And if at any point of time I am not audible, you guys please send messages in the chat box so that I know what's happening. So I will just, because I am not sharing my screen, I will have to take the help of Komal, I believe. So whenever I want to go to the next slide, I will let you know, and then you can change to the next slide. Am I not audible again?
Yeah, you're audible right now. Dr. Sengupta,
okay,
you're audible to
okay,
right now.
Okay, great. So I'll start. essentially the talk, the way I have designed it today, is going to be about the impact of the current COVID-19 health shock that we are all facing, the impact of that on the Indian economy. Now, if you go to the next slide, which basically gives an outline of what the talk is going to cover, because it is such a broad topic, what I decided today is to focus on specific aspects of this crisis. So first of all, I'll just lay down the context, which is well known to all of you by now. Then I will give a brief preview of how the Indian economy was prior to this outbreak of COVID-19. I think it's very important to understand how the Indian economy was positioned before this outbreak started, because that will have a very important effect on the crisis going forward. Komal, at this point, I'm just on the second slide where I'm just looking at the outline, where the bullet points on slide 0 essentially is just about what the content is going to be. I think if you go on the screen show mode, it will be easier. Then you can just keep going to the next.
Sorry, ma'am.
Can you go to the screen show or slideshow mode? If not, just keep on that slide where I have 5 points outlined,
the right
which
slide?
are basically the sort of table of contents. Banking sector, the financial sector.
Hello.
Because that is extremely important.
Can you hold your
for understanding. Yes. So then, after having talked about what is happening in the banking sector, I'll talk about the overall macroeconomic impact of this crisis as it is unfolding right now as we speak. And finally, I'll do a brief analysis of the policies that have been announced. Once again, in the interest of time, I will focus on the banking sector specifically, because we don't have so much of time to cover all the policies that have been announced, and maybe at some future session. Yeah, the slide which is titled a global pandemic.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I just had a text from Komal. She's unable to hear you. Can you just hold your microphone a little closer to your mouth?
Yeah, I'm holding it right in front of my mouth.
Yeah. Komal, can you hear right now? Yes, I think she can hear you right now.
Okay, fine. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so to lay out the context of the crisis, essentially, as you all know by now, that we are in the middle of what is called a global pandemic, which is inflicting two kinds of shock on us. And the two kinds of shock are essentially, one is a health shock and one is an economic shock. And one can argue that health shock is relatively temporary, because we all know that at some point of time, the virus, the health crisis is going to abate. But the economic crisis, the economic fallout of that may last much, much longer. And that is why it's extremely important for us to understand what might be happening and what policies might be needed. Also, why is there an economic shock? Essentially because all the ways to contain the spread of the virus include actions such as social distancing, self-isolation at home, mobility restrictions, and including lockdown of the entire country, which is what we are experiencing right now. And that is inherently problematic, not just for India, of course, but for all the affected economies around the world, because everybody is struggling to cope with the economic fallout of the measures that have been adopted. Because essentially the nature of the virus is such that, and the disease is so infectious, that if you want to effectively contain the virus or the disease, then that requires stopping the normal functioning of the economy. And that's the very, very difficult and challenging trade-off in front of policymakers all over the world today, that on one hand you have this health crisis that you want to deal with, but in order to address that, what is needed is to stop the economy from functioning, which is also very, very damaging. As a result of this, there have been fears of a deep and prolonged global recession, not only for this year, but maybe even for the next year. And it's an unprecedented shock because we have, in our entire lifetime, or even our parents' lifetime, for example, or even before, have never experienced something similar to this. The International Monetary Fund, for example, has recently said, and this is the chief of the IMF, she said recently that the year 2020 could see the worst global economic fallout since the Great Depression of the 1930s, with over 170 countries likely to experience negative per capita GDP growth due to the coronavirus pandemic. And that's extremely, extremely severe, as you can imagine, with almost all countries of the world which have been affected by this disease are going to be experiencing negative growth, which is like a recession. So it's an unprecedented shock, and of course, India will not escape it. There is no doubt about it. Now, the India-specific, Komal, if you go to the next slide, which is titled Outbreak in India. Yeah. So as you know, that the first case in India was recorded on 30th January. But since then, of course, over the last 2.5 months or so, there has been a steady increase in the number of cases. We are currently, in fact, now in the last few days, the cases have been increasing quite at a rapid rate. The number of deaths has also gone up. In order to curb the transmission of the virus, the government announced a lockdown of 3 weeks starting March 25th. And subsequently extended it to May 3rd, which is the lockdown that we are all currently in. And what does the lockdown mean? Essentially, the lockdown means that all non-essential services and businesses have been suspended. All institutions, all recreational places, all places of worship, everything, all offices, pretty much, other than maybe a few government offices and banks, everything has been suspended. As a result of the lockdown, this is creating hardship for millions of people across the country, both in the formal and in the informal sector, because again, it's an unprecedented situation that we have never been in. And of course, it is expected to result in a very sharp economic slowdown because all manner of economic